Welcome to Sambhashana, a fortnightly talk show where I'll be presenting conversation with diverse personalities from various industries, and I'm your host, Nilima Somashekar. For this week, we have with us a celebrated award-winning author, Dr. Debashish Sengupta. He has authored Life of Why, Engaging Millennials as Employees and Consumers. He also has authored the book Life of Z, Understanding Digital Preteen and Adolescent Generation. Dr. Sengupta is the co-author of the crossword bestseller and KPMG cited book, Employee Engagement. He has authored six other acclaimed books as well. I am glad to share that his book, The Life of Why, won the first prize at the prestigious DMNTPC Business Book Awards in 2018. On the academic front, Dr. Sengupta is a dual PhD holder, also holds three certifications from Harvard University, including Harvard University Teaching Certification. He has been featured globally as the author of the week by PM World Journal USA. He has received several research awards in his career spanning over 2 decades, including Best Paper Awards and Young Research Awards. He serves on the board of advisors of many exciting startups in India, Dubai, and United Kingdom. His interview has featured in leading electronic and print media. He is also the editor of UK-based global digital magazine Future of the Earth. Presently, he is teaching human resources and strategy at the Royal University for Women in Bahrain. A very warm welcome, Doctor, to you, and I'm super elated and honored to be very honest to have you on this episode of Sambhashana.
Thank you, Nilima. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be invited on this show, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I was very elated when you accept my invitation, and I felt that, oh God, I've had an opportunity to just talk to you.
No, same here. I think I've been watching your Sambhashana series, and it's very interesting, and you have picked up very, very relevant and I think useful topics. I think, and I've seen the reaction of people online, and it's a great initiative by you. And as I said, I'm excited to be invited on this show.
Thank you for those encouraging words. Now, Debashish, when we met a few years back, we saw about 35% of millennials in the workspace. Now, what do the statistics look like now?
Well, statistics is mind-boggling because, in terms of when we talk about millennials today are making the largest percentage of the workforce and will continue to do so for the next decade or so. So if you look at the other generation, which is probably just started to enter, the oldest ones is Gen Z, which has come after millennials. So if you put these two generations together, they make up close to 54% of world's population. So that's more than half, right? So that's where the two very important generational cohorts that we are talking about, the millennials and Gen Z. Gen Z are still mostly either in school or colleges. And as I said, the oldest Gen Zs are just starting to trickle into the workforce. But millennials still, kind of make most of that workforce. In terms of consumer spending, these two generations currently make up about 48% of global spending. So half the money spent globally for consumption comes from these generations. By 2040, this would go up to around, I think, 70%, which means 70% of the global consumption and the global consumer purchases will be driven by these two generations. Coming to your question, workforce. By 2025, that is another 3 years, millennials will make close to 75% of the world's working population, which is 2/3 of the world's working population. Boomers will be the last of the boomer will retire by 2028. So, and boomers have seen an early retirement also, which means the working population will be comprised of 75% millennials, and the rest 25% will be made up by Gen X, some of the Gen X who are like in the senior leadership and the senior management positions, and some Gen Zs who have entered, at the entry levels of the workforce. So millennials would be the major chunk of the workforce. In fact, if you see, it's not only that. In US, they are already the largest percentage of workforce. So in certain geographies, they have already become the largest percentage of workforce. Take India, for instance. India has 65% of the population below 35 years of age, which makes India as perhaps the youngest country in the world. Housing India and China put together have a majority of the millennials and Gen Zs living anywhere in the world. So these statistics, why is this statistics important? Because this tells us that these are two cohorts, and especially millennials, because millennials also have the spending power at this moment. And so they are not only cohort who are important at the workplace as employees, the major percentage or the major chunk of employees, but they are also very significant at the marketplace as the major, spending powerhouse.
Thank you so much for giving us those wonderful insights in terms of the percentage wise and many other important aspects. Now, I'm very curious, always curious, because every time I meet you, I have this question. Why is it so important to understand this section of, section of the generation compare, in these generation? And, why is it so important that you have taken it up and written a book on it? And what was the driving factor for you to do so much of research and come up with these books?
See, whenever we say generational, research, generational research is or understanding generations, it's not new. It's something that every time we need to understand a new generation. And that's why whenever there is a misunderstanding or there is a lack of understanding, we say it's a generational gap, when the older generation and younger generation can't come on the same page, right? So it is not that, we started looking at generations only from millennials. There is always a requirement to understand the generation. Now, how do we qualify a generation? Why do we need to call them a separate generation? How do we separate one generation from the other? That the answer to this also answers your question. Whenever we say a new generation has come, we are saying this because we see a major shift in mindsets, in attitudes, in behaviors, in life realities and life, styles. So we see a major shift from the previous cohort. Whenever we see that major shift, we qualify them as a generation. Generally, 20 years when we say a new generation has come, although it's not constant. Sometimes it could be plus minus 5, right? So it could be here and there, right? But generally, whenever we see that shift, we say a new generation has come. So which means what? When we're talking about millennials or when we're talking about Gen Zs, let's talk about millennials. We are primarily talking about millennials here. We are talking of a generation which is different from the previous generation. Okay. But then why millennials per se? Why I focused on millennials? Because to say that they are different from the previous generation is an understatement. They are, kind of not only different, they are very, very different. And they are very, very different in terms of the way they think, the way their mindsets, their attitudes, their behaviors, and their life realities. And the reason has been that they have lived a transformed time. The time basically, the times that they have lived in, especially during their formative years, during their growing years, has seen tumultuous changes around the world, right? Whether it has been the time when they were growing up, where they were, the 9/11 or the Lehman Brothers, the corporate greed, or the terror attacks. All this was very had a transformational impact on this generation, right? So that meant that they grew up very differently from the previous generation. And if you look at their life realities also, their life realities are very different from the previous generation. They have gained less, lost more. Okay. If you say, okay, what they have gained, okay, they've gained probably being having more choices in terms of, say, career choices have increased. Today, there are much more careers available. Earlier, when we were growing up, at that time, the only two respectable career options were either you become an engineer or you become a doctor. And if you can't become either of them, then you are of no use, something like that. It was like that, but it was not like that. So they've got more choices. They have got more. They've got a more globalized world, which is, and hence they are more connected. They've got the social media for themselves, which made them very much powerful. They're not dependent on the traditional media, right? They have their own voice. Everybody can say publicly, and reach out to millions at one time, using the power of social media. So they are the connected one. So they've gained all this, but they've lost much more. What they have lost? They have lost the security that once people have about their jobs, right? So, they have lost their health. If you see, this is millennials onwards, and I think millennials, I will say that they have suffered both in terms of their mental health as well as physical health. Physical health, mental health, and I don't need to give statistics. We know the number of hypertension cases, the cardiac cases, the mental, the depression becoming almost another global epidemic. They have lost in terms of, they have lost social support. They have mostly lived with very less social support system. They don't have the kind of social support which earlier generations had, right? They have lost in terms of friends. They have a huge network today, but they, it's very difficult to call everyone as friends, although Facebook calls all of them as friends. They have lost in terms of their, what you say, the social aspect, in terms of that they have become more lonelier. So they have lost more and they have gained less, right? So this is the life reality, which is very different from the previous generation, not like the and finally, I think this generation is the only generation which has seen two major setbacks in their prime years. Mind you, prime years. And what are those two major setbacks? The first was when they were almost entering the workforce. They were eyes full of dreams and all that. And that's when the global financial meltdown happened, right? And that kind of dashed their hopes, dashed their dreams in terms of the kind of dreams that they had seen or they had been served with in terms of careers, packages, compensation, or whatever. It dashed a lot. And then when they were recovering in the next decade, 1 decade or so, when they were recovering that, the COVID-19 pandemic happened, which is also has hit, them in their prime years, right? So if you look at the job losses around the world, or that happened during this last 2-3 years, the majority of them were the people who suffered were millennials, right? So this is the only generation which has suffered two major setbacks, major global setbacks. And it's not like a regional or a local setback. It's a global setback in their prime years. All this makes millennials a must study. On one hand, we have a generation which is very different, a generation which has gained less and lost more, a generation which has seen two major setbacks in their prime years, but also a generation which today makes up and is going to make up the largest percentage of our workforce. So what does this do? When we put these 2 and 2 together, what does it tell us, right? So it definitely tells us that we cannot ignore this generation. This makes it what you would say, very pertinent for me. And that was the reason, perhaps, that my research moved into this direction for the last more than I think decade and a half or so. Yes. That I've been studying that.
But then, Debashish, I somehow feel, to some extent, you have given, an insight last time also when we had a conversation. But however, I would want to say that this certain generation is pampered. They have many more options, unlike the years that we grew up.
See, I think when we say pampered, we probably say that because we think that they have more resources available to them,
Yes,
right?
I would, yeah, and I could say pampered in all kind of ways. They have access to all sorts of things at their hand, fingertips, and many more things are just easily accessible compared to the years that you and me grew. We never had those kind of options available that what we have now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There is no doubt about that. Thanks to the globalization, thanks to the economic reforms that happened not only in India but around the world, in the late 80s and 90s. But they have more resources available with them, which also complicates their life also. Remember, it's a two-way, it's a double-edged sword. As like for instance, take social media. Is it good for them? Yes. Is it bad for them? Yes. Does it give them a lot of advantage? Yes. But does it also create a lot of turbulence in their lives? Yes, that's true, right? Look at the kind of infodemic, that happened along with the epidemic in these last 2 years. The most difficult thing was how to deal with so much of fake news that was coming around, and this fake, and how do you deal with that, because you wake up in the morning and you see so many things, which makes it very difficult, right? So it's not easy to deal with fake news, especially when it is a bad news, right? So there was a lot uh, of this, which caused a lot of stress to people, and so it's a double-edged. The resources one way make life easier. One way, like for instance, you say, okay, now it's we live in the era of smartphones, of where anybody can, you have access any place, anytime, right? So you don't, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, but that also meant that it is now become difficult to switch off work, right?
Yes.
You everything reaches you no matter what time you are, so it's of course, there is no doubt that they have many more resources at their disposal, but it also kind of creates it is the two-way, right? So it has its own pros, but it also has its own cons.
Yes. And moving on from here, just another aspect I would want to understand from you is you've been interacting with millennials globally. One small differentiation or comparison that you see back home millennials and the millennials globally?
Okay, see, the answer to this is the cultural context. The cultural context makes millennials different in different parts of the world. So, otherwise, in terms of their attitudes, mindsets, behaviors, in many ways, they are very similar. And why they are similar? Because this is, again, as I said, this is the first generation which woke up to the revolution of connected world, the electronically connected world. It is the first generation which woke up to the power of social media, right? So which made them connect with people around the world. So they knew they have access, the access to information was so huge, and it continues to do so, that it kind of what do you say, it made them a particular way, right? So I have seen this. I have interacted with millennials from US, from Europe, from Gulf region where I currently reside, in India, and even in some other Asian countries, and I see a kind of attitudinal level similarity with them. But and which is primarily, if you say attitudes are or mindsets are the determinant for behaviors, for expressions that we see in our day-to-day life. So there is a lot of similarity, right, in terms of their their penchant for taking risks as far as career choices are concerned, or their aspect of seeking for network, or in terms of the kind of choices they make in terms of their brand purchases, or the career choices, or companies, or their concern for sustainability, or concern for social good, or the planet. All this, if you see, there is a lot of similarity, in terms of but What makes them perhaps a little different is the cultural context. So,
Okay.
so when I live here, like in the Gulf region, the cultural context is different than India, right? So, and if you go to Europe, their cultural context is so cultural context is the only differentiator. Otherwise, there is a lot of similarity amongst millennials that you see, right? Like when we say aspirational generation, is the like even why do you even go outside India? Within India, if you see urban millennials, rural millennials, are they aspirational? Yes. Are the rural millennials aspirational? Yes.
Yes.
It's not that they are not aspirational. They are they also aspire to have the similar kind of choices that the urban millennials are making. Yes, their context may be different. Those living in the urban context have a different context than rural context. Now, like for instance, the aspect of risk taking, for instance, right? Or we say Bangalore is the startup capital of India. So we see many millennials actually moving towards entrepreneurship, right?
Okay.
Or preferring entrepreneurship. So if we think this is an urban phenomena, we are wrong. This is also a rural phenomena. One of my friend, he's a CEO of a very prominent NGO called Pani, and they work with more than 70,000 farmer and their families in the Western UP. And I was just having a conversation with him, and he was telling me as to how they have started a project where they are training the rural girls, the village girls who are at least high school educated, into becoming young entrepreneurs, and even the village, the boys, becoming entrepreneurs. And of course, I don't want to go into the details, but they are doing a splendid job in terms of doing that. But the fact that they're able to work with them and convert them into entrepreneurs is the reason behind this, that they also have that aspiration to do so. They are willing to take that risk. They are willing to jump into entrepreneurship. So there is a underlying similarity that you see. The superficial differences that you see is a contextual difference. It's either urban rural contextual difference, or it's a cultural contextual difference that we see.
Okay. Now, Debashish, now we see that every household has at least one millennial in the current days, and you have a Gen Z at home. What is the scene like to deal with having, one at home? And because I'm asking this question because on a personal front, how is it for you to deal with?
Okay, I think the key word here is what we say is, how do we engage these people, right? How do we engage them? That knowing that they're different, knowing that they would probably have different kind of way of thinking with their behavior, how do we really engage them? Now, that engagement, whether it is in home context, social context, employee context, or customer context, or volunteer context, the aspect of engagement remains same. And when we say engagement, this word is not a business word. The word did not originate in business. This word engagement itself originated from life. And if you see, it came from the what we call is something that happens before marriage, right? So it's like when a boy and girl are engaged. So that's where the engagement word came. Is engagement then a mere ceremony? No. Engagement is not only a mere ceremony. Engagement, why this whole engagement aspect came? Because they're given opportunity for both the boy and the girl and their families to better understand each other. Because the more the understanding, the sweeter will be the marriage. The sweeter will be the union about them and the life that they lead with each other. Two people living under the same roof would find it very difficult to live together happily and in love if they don't understand each other. If there is a lack of understanding or misunderstanding, to be worse, amongst them, it cannot happen, right? So if you see, understanding is the precursor to engagement, right? When you understand someone really well, you are also able to engage them or engage with them, right? So it's the same thing when we talk about generation, whether we millennials or Gen Z. the secret to engaging them is to first understand them. And understanding doesn't mean understanding it from where I am standing. No, if I am standing on a high building and I see, I have my vision, I see everything small, and I continue to try to understand from that position. No, if I have to really understand, I have to climb down that tower, come to their level, come to that base level, and then understand them. So when we say understanding, okay, we'll understand them. No, it's not so simple. Understanding means you have to appreciate their perspective. You have to see things from their perspective, how they have seen, how they are trying to visualize it, right? And that is what we call as empathy, right? So empathy, understanding, engagement with empathetic understanding, let's say, like this. So when we have that empathetic understanding, we'll be able to really understand them and appreciate their perspectives, their viewpoints. Not necessarily we will find everything agreeable to what we believe, but we will probably appreciate those things more than we do now. And when we appreciate those things more, we will be able to, I think, engage with them and engage them, right? Both.
Okay, now I have, but I really liked one thing what you said. The secret to engaging is you understand it. When the other generation, that is our generation, is putting in so much of efforts to engage them, understand them, don't you think likewise there should be an effort from that and also, to engage and understand with this generation?
Yeah, true, of course, yes. There is no doubt about that. And I think, but it's like who belts the cat first, like who takes the initiative first,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Now, should they also try to understand the older generations? Yes, of course. They have to, if they have to work with the older generation, which they have to. But who takes the initiative is determined by the positional superiority and situational power, right? Now, who has the positional superiority and more situational power? It's the older generation. Because whether it is when we talk about parents or whether we talk about the managers or the senior leaders, they are the ones who are having the positional superiority and situational power. So when you are at a position where you have more power and you can call more shots than someone else, then it also, the onus is on you first and you more to understand the younger generation and not on them to understand you first. When you try to understand them, they will also understand you better. It's like that. So I think, yes, of course they need to, but the onus is on the older generation. Onus is on the other generation, not on them.
Debashish, I really like, that's why I think I personally like you, because you put across things so brilliantly and so where the other person can understand this so easily. I think that is
Thank
why
you.
you are the professor and you've written so many books. Okay.